Imagine a battlefield where biology collides with belief. Telepaths try to read minds that literally rewrite reality. Reality warpers face mutants who shrug off cosmic blows, and rosters go so deep that any corner can hide a game-breaking secret. The X-Men have been forged by decades of continuity into a sprawling tapestry of power upgrades, strategies, and triumphs that have pushed some members from street tier level into living god territory. While the Phantom Thieves are a tight-knit crew whose power doesn't just change outcomes, it changes the rules that define outcomes, bending desires, memories, and archetypal data until reality itself conforms to their intent. In this video, we'll run through the cosmic showdown of mutants versus personas, a clash of legends. Mutant evolution versus cognitive omnipotence, and the ways a fight can be won when the very fabric of reality is on the table. In other words, today we'll be exploring and breaking down the Phantom Thieves versus the X-Men. Before we get started, I think it's first worth covering some stipulations. Ahead of that though, I want to issue a special thank you to Sharad for the commission. I greatly appreciate the commission, brother, and anyone else who's interested in commissioning a video you'd like to see, click the link in my bio to get started. Next, it's worth noting the cast members that were requested for these teams, as the membership hasn't remained stagnant throughout their time as teams. For the X-Men, this team will be made up of Cyclops, Wolverine, Storm, Jean Grey, Gambit, Beast, Rogue, Nightcrawler, Colossus, Emma Frost, and Kitty Pryde. For the Phantom Thieves, we'll have Joker, Mona, Panther, Skull, Fox, Queen, Oracle, Noir, Crow, Violet, and Sophie. Now, full disclosure, this is a 20 to 30 minute commission, so a lot of these characters won't be covered because A, we won't have time, and B, it doesn't really matter. Some of these characters on both sides have absurd scaling, which makes the others on the teams completely irrelevant. But we'll get into that once we dive into the scaling portions. Just wanted to give you guys a heads up. As far as the actual battle goes, we'll be taking the current peak forms for each character. They'll all be fighting in character with intent to kill, and a win will be decided by one team killing or incapacitating the other group, and the battle will take place in a neutral battlefield, so we'll say it's a random planet in a neutral universe. But with that out of the way, it's time to dig into the scaling, starting with the Phantom Thieves. Okay, so here's the deal. I did an enormous amount of research because Persona's cosmology and character scaling are unusually intricate, and the community is split between planetary, universal, and high outer interpretations. With help from my buddy Hobbs, I put the pieces together into what I consider the definitive scaling for this setting, and Hobbs deserves an enormous amount of credit for not only translating scans that I look into for Naruto videos, but also doing the majority of the research on this and putting together the cosmological scaling in a way that makes sense. But there's a lot of technical stuff that's going into this, so number one, get ready. Number two, shout out to Hobbs for that critical help. In both Shin Megami Tensei and Persona, reality is fundamentally informational. Cognition and data are the substrate of existence, so the cosmology is arranged as stacked informational brackets rather than merely nesting physical spaces. First, we have Asaya, the prime material realm, ordinary physical reality. Above that sits the expanse, or the collective unconscious, which is a sea of thought and possibility that functions as the informational substrate for the whole classes of the universes. Deeper than that is the Kadath Mandala, a domain of ultimate archetypes and the building blocks for possible worlds. And beyond that is the Monad Mandala, the bedrock source for souls and creation itself. Because these levels are about control of data and archetypal structure rather than brute matter manipulation, beings who manipulate or command those layers operate at qualitatively higher ontological tiers. Altering Asaya adjusts particular physical realities, altering the expanse reshapes the bracket that contains infinite multiverses, reshaping Kadath manipulates the archetypal rules that generate possibilities themselves, and touching the monad is to access root-level creation and soul origin. So power measured here is a matter of how many stacked conceptual brackets a character can affect and whether they can overwrite the data that defines reality types. Higher tier demons and archetypal entities like Lucifer, Satan, and top personas demonstrate feats that are distinctly outerversal because they operate on the conceptual/data substrate rather than only a spatially bound universe. They can destroy, merge, or otherwise manipulate entire demon universes or brackets inside of the expanse, which is not equivalent to erasing a single multiverse, but to erasing a bracket containing infinite multiverses built from the collective unconscious. Because the expanse functions as an informational tier above ordinary multiverses, entities that directly manipulate or erase it are crossing the boundary boundary into the outerversal territory by default. So destroying or merging the Expanse qualifies for at least one layer into outerversal. Practical AP here is outerversal 1 layer, and operational speed is effectively immeasurable since these beings act across or within the collective unconscious, where time/space causal restrictions don't apply. Yaldabaoth is the god administrator of the collective unconscious and functions as the warden of every possibility that constitutes reality within the Expanse and the Kadath Mandala. His power is not merely to swim in or influence the sea, but to govern the conceptual framework that includes Asaya, the Expanse, and the Kadath, which elevates him above a single bracket of manipulators. Because ruling the collective unconscious implies absolute dominion across multiple stacked informational structures, controlling archetypes, demons, and personas, and manipulating the scaffolding of the Kadath Mandala, Yaldabaoth occupies a higher outerversal tier than the demons who merely manipulate the Expanse, placing him at roughly 2 layers into outerversal, with AP accordingly, and with immeasurable plus operational scope across the entire collective unconscious and its subordinate realities. Jehovah is depicted as operating from a domain that infinitely transcends the Expanse, split into multiple higher tier dimensional brains that are each a further order of reality above the previous brackets. Each brain entirely contains and infinitely transcends the layer beneath it, which means Yahweh's sphere is not a single outerversal step, but a stack of several such steps. Because these brains are explicitly framed as higher order outerversal brackets, and Yahweh functions outside or above these stacked brains, his locus of authority corresponds to 4 outerversal layers in your schema, AP at 4 layers of outerversal, with omnipresent acausal operation inside these brains and a speed/causality profile that makes time and spatial limits irrelevant within his domain. Philemon and Nyarlathotep, let's say that 5 times fast, occupy the Monad Mandala, a realm portrayed as deeper than Yahweh's brains and effectively the source or origin point for souls, archetypes, and the cognitive machinery that yields all lower brackets. Their role is root access to the entire stacked conceptual architecture. Given Yahweh's 4 stacked outerversal brains and the Monad Mandala's position as the origin above those brains, Philemon and Nyarlathotep, who I'm going to call Nia from now on, are at least 1 more layer beyond that, conservatively 5 layers into outerversal. So AP is 5+ layers into outerversal, and their presence is ontologically ubiquitous with acausal, omnipresent reach across any soul, thought, or datum that composes reality. But that brings us to the Phantom Thieves. Maruki and Joker operate in the late game as reality editors who contest dominion across the Expanse and the Kadath Mandala, with Maruki summoning/deploying entities like Hastur and evolving towards Adam Kadmon, while Joker wields infinite personas and defeats Yaldabaoth. Because both contest and overwrite archetypal and conceptual rules that govern the Kadath Mandala and the Expanse, their feats place them above simple Expanse manipulators, but below the Monad Mandala origins. The practical resolution is that both Maruki and Endgame Joker register at roughly 3 layers into outerversal, high enough to rewrite archetypal structure across infinite multiverses and to defeat Yaldabaoth and Adam Kadmon variants, giving them AP at outerversal 3 layers and immeasurable plus speed across the informational realms they control. So that's a lot, but just let me give you a quick visual layer summary. Layer 0 is Asaya, the ordinary multiversal/physical reality, standard demons, non-archetypal persona users. Layer 1 is Outerversal, the Expanse/collective unconsciousness. Lucifer, Satan, high-tier demons who manipulate this data substrate exist in this realm. Layer 2, Outerversal Plus, is the Kadath Mandala, Yaldabaoth, and figures who control archetypal domains and narrative possibility. Layer 3 is Outerversal Plus, True God's brains. Yahweh's on this level, representing as multiple brain layers, and you're mapping these correspond to 4 stacked outerversal steps. And then layer 4/5, or outerversal plus, the Monad Mandala. Philemon and Nia are at this level. It's the original root level above even the stacked brains. So with this visual summary, you can see how these stack on top of each other, but it's not really just one layer stacked on top of another, it's more like one layer containing the ones below it. Think about like a Russian nesting doll. Each layer is contained by a different layer, and so on and so forth, with the outermost layer being the highest level, or the Monad Mandala, so on and so forth. Now, by the end of Persona 5 Royal, Joker and his high-end opponents are not merely breaking single universes, but are operating on and rewriting the data layers that define categories categories of reality. Maruki and Joker sit around 3 layers into Outerversal, Yaldabaoth at 2 layers, Yahweh at 4 layers, and Philemon/Nia at 5+ layers, so the Phantom Thieves and comparable top characters should be treated as high outer entities with immeasurable speed when placed in multiversal or cross-cosmology matchups. So that's basically their scaling, as most of the Phantom Thieves sort of scale to one another based on how the gameplay works, and there's really not much to get around that. Now, massive thanks to Hobbs for breaking down this tiering as much as he has. It's the most in-depth way to go about it, I think, and probably the most accurate breakdown of this scaling possible. Something else worthy of note is that scalers are often very skeptical of whether or not Persona users even scale to the mainline SMT verse, but we actually have direct evidence that Persona users can actually rival and even soundly defeat even powerful devil summoners. In Persona 2, a Persona user named King Leo was able to easily defeat Tamaki, who was the main protagonist of SMT IF, and actually fought Hazama, who wielded the power of Zervan, which created Ahriman, a very powerful demon who fought near the end of SMT3 Nocturne. So this should showcase that not only do these Persona characters exist within the same larger cosmology, but they also do just definitively scale to these levels. But now that we've went over that and have a solid grasp as to where the Phantom Thieves should scale, let's dig into the scaling for the X-Men. When it comes to scaling the X-Men, or anyone in Marvel for that matter, we have to first understand how the Marvel cosmology works, much like we just did with the Personaverse. I touch on this briefly in my Star-Lord vs. Luffy video, but deeper treatment is necessary here because the cosmology is far larger and more structurally important to power scaling in this video than that one. I'd also like to say that I did just lowball in that video because I wanted to just get Star-Lord to the level that would defeat Luffy without going way overboard. So I took a low-end interpretation of Star-Lord to place him at the level that I did, but the Marvel universe goes way higher than what I let on in that video. Starting off, the Marvel cosmology is massive, with infinitely stacked dimensions, realms that transcend conceptual existences, and infinities beyond infinities that render smaller infinities completely irrelevant. So that is to say, there is a huge hierarchical structure to work with. To make that practical, I want to start small and work up, and by small, I mean atomic. In Marvel, atoms are not merely matter, but infinite fractal multiverses, following the worlds within worlds concept as seen in Silver Surfer, where each subatomic particle contains an infinite universe with its own stars, galaxies, and sentient life. That infinity is not merely spatial. Each layer exhibits reality over fiction transcendence, with higher dimensional realities over the ones below them, transcending them in this way. Much like with Persona, think about this as a higher and lower dimensional Russian nesting doll. Critically, every one of these infinite atoms also houses the Jungian collective unconscious. In Marvel lore, the Mindscape and Dreamtime are literal planes populated by Jungian archetypes, platonic blueprints that exist beyond time, space, and dimensionality, and therefore, by definition, scale to Outerversal. But basically, if every atom in 616 contains an infinite universe, and each such universe contains archetypal collective unconscious, then even a single drop of water is a stack of roughly 5 sextillion infinite Outerversal cosmi, and since the average adult human contains approximately 7 octillion atoms, characters composed of these atoms who tank hits from similarly composed beings inherit at least a baseline scaling of roughly 2 layers into outer, simply by virtue of the atomic stacking. Attempts to rebut this by claiming if each atom contains a universe, then the universe is atom-sized, fail because those universes are explicitly infinite, so the usual finite intuition does not apply. Think of it in set theoretic terms where the atom is Aleph 1 and the human is Aleph 2 to capture strict transcendence rather than a mere size inversion. Pushing the idea further, Marvel's universes spawn infinite possibilities at every Planck moment, and that principle applies recursively to the micro-universes contained within atoms, producing an infinite branching of real universes inside each atom, each infinite in size and each housing Jungian archetypes, which drives each individual such microverse into one layer into outer, and because the atom contains that structure, it pushes each atom itself into at least 2 layers into outer. Some in the power scaling community object on authorial intent grounds, but Marvel creators and text have effectively stated this worlds within worlds architecture is true. Rebuttals tend to be arguments from incredulity rather than substantiative counters. The practical consequences is a powerful stacking argument. The Marvel omniverses, nested microverses, and archetypal layers make each breath a cosmic event, and every punch a multiversal collapse. So baseline 6 616 residents should be treated conservatively as at least 2 layers into outer versal in terms of attack potency and existence. For those who prefer a slightly different route, the same conclusion follows by placing the mainline Marvel multiverse as transcending the microverse. If the microverse houses archetypal outer class beings, then the microverse itself is outer by containing them, and by recursion, the mainline multiverse attains 2 layers into outer as well, although atom-level scaling is more vivid and functionally equivalent, so that's why I like to go with that. Now that the baseline is established though, the next step is to apply those principles and decide where exactly the X-Men scale within that ontological framework, using the 2-layer into outer baseline as the starting point for each character and then adding character-by-character adjustments. Since there are only 2 characters in the X-Men who go on to infinitely transcend even this level, the only relevant ones to scale here are Storm and Jean. Storm's official billing and narrative positioning establish her as a top-tier X-level benchmark rather than a routine or merely cosmic character, with her being directly stated to be the strongest mutant, with this justifying treating her peak shown feats as representative of her true scaling. Her godhead ascension is portrayed as not simply amplification of weather control, but as a true godhead that expands the ontology of her abilities from elemental manipulation to broader environmental and metaphysical causation, enabling effects that operate on and alter higher-order aspects of reality rather than only local or planetary systems. The adversary against whom she directly fights while in or empowered by Godhead status is characterized in canon as a pan-dimensional beyond-adjacent force that warps Otherworld, exerts causal influence over meta layers, and poses threats reaching towards eternity and omniversal infrastructure such as the Starlight Citadel, so defeating or repelling him demonstrates Storm's capacity to project causation and neutralizing force into regions and ontological layers that sit outside of or above the standard Marvel Omniverse. Because the beyond/outside and Otherworld are consistently described as transcending the Omniverse, metaphorically linked to the white of the page or metafictional space that contains and exceeds the omniversal structure, interaction and dominance over entities anchored there constitutes outer/outerversal effects rather than merely omniversal ones, and Storm's Godhead feats and adversary engagements explicitly involve that domain. Limbo and similar higher planes sit inside the Omniverse, but are themselves transcendent in certain aspects, and the Beyond is depicted as at least one additional transcendental layer above such realms, so any being able to affect Beyond-class spaces transitively outranks Limbo-class planes, and thus requires additional outer layering. The adversary's warping of the Starlight Citadel and demonstrable pan-dimensional reach mean that a successive opponent must be able to affect omniversal and beyond omniversal structures, which aligns with assigning Storm a conservative minimum of several layers into outer for AP, consistent with a floor of roughly 4 layers into outer when the premises are combined. Finally, Storm's survivability coheres with her offensive scaling because canonical sequences show her enduring sustained exchanges with adversary-level foes and remaining functional after trading effects that would normally incapacitate lower-tier characters or merely omniversal entities. So the same ontological reach that grants her capacity to impose causation into beyond-adjacent spaces also grants matching durability, producing a symmetric mapping of attack potency and defensive resilience in the high outer tier. Her speed automatically qualifies for immeasurable or irrelevant or potentially omnipresent by being able to fight these characters as well, as adversary is above Eternity, who fought a battle that transcended time and space altogether, with the battle happening everywhere and everywhen all at once. That second part is what gets her into that omnipresent tier more likely than not, as being above Eternity means she can fight a being which is everything, allowing her to literally be everywhere and everywhen all at once. So needless to say, Storm is an absolute monster. Storm's primary power is weather and environmental manipulation, but framing it as mere elemental tricks undersells the breadth and depth of her Omega-level portfolio. She can generate and precisely shape massive atmospheric phenomena, lightning, hurricanes, monsoons, etc., while also producing localized microenvironments on demand, and her attunement to the environment extends to sensing and interacting with ambient conditions across vast distances, effectively perceiving changes in the planetary and extraplanetary environment as well as the universe at large and even beyond, rather than only immediate local weather. Canonical descriptions that list her as an Omega-level cryomancer and hydrokinetic place her alongside top-tier manipulators of matter matter states like Iceman, and statements that she can manipulate the energies comprising an environment imply a broad spectrum of control over thermodynamic, electromagnetic, and chemical parameters rather than a narrow elemental niche, which explains feats such as sustaining respiration in a vacuum, reconfiguring atmospheres inside multiple spacecraft simultaneously, and tactical uses in combat, such as isolating Silver Surfer in a hydrogen envelope and applying electrical discharge to neutralize him. This shows that her power operates at both planetary and operationally precise scales at the bare minimum, but obviously goes massively beyond that level because of her fight with the adversary. Basically, Storm's weather control functions as a comprehensive environmental mastery that includes universal plus sensing, microenvironment creation, state of matter manipulation, and energy control, supporting both large-scale and surgically precise feats that place her among Omega-level manipulators and beyond. For some reason, Storm is also completely immune to telepathy and can use her abilities to give people seizures or shut down bodily functions by manipulating electrical currents in their bodies, and she's even capable of containing the mind of eternity, with eternity, again, being the physical embodiment of all reality. This should be obvious by now, but she does just possess pan-dimensional physiology, being able to exist and stated to be stronger in higher dimensional planes, where she fights people like the adversary, which makes sense because she's the primordial opposite of the Phoenix, which is such a being, and actually leads us to our next character, Jean Grey. For Jean, this pattern continues. Her massive AP is demonstrated by feats such as mending the White Hot Room, with the White Hot Room being a beyond-class locus tied directly to the Phoenix Force and therefore sits outside of ordinary dimensionality, time, space, life, death, and duality. Operating within and affecting that realm requires capabilities beyond standard cosmic tiers, so Jean's ability to repair and stabilize that locus indicates genuine beyond/outer traversal and manipulation. Because this realm is infinitely transcendental relative to the higher planes inside of the Marvel Omniverse, the same scaling that applies to Storm at high outer level for analogous beyond adjacent feats applies to Jean as well, giving her at least 4 outer layers of AP, and her designation as the Phoenix's perfect vessel places her above Phoenix acolytes such as Girard and Pharaon, who perform extreme but more localized manipulations, like cauterizing eternity or expanding an energy matrix across all reality, meaning Jean's role is ontologically deeper and more intimately bound to the beyond-class mechanics of the Phoenix Force than they are. Basically, Jean's repair of the White Hot Room and status as the Phoenix's perfect vessel argue for genuine beyond/outer capabilities, justifying this at least 4 layers into outer scaling and placing her above other high-end Phoenix avatars in ontological significance. Jean's raw durability lacks explicit showings against beings at true outerversal scales, but her pan-dimensional physiology confers a functional toughness far beyond mundane limits. Existing outside normal spacetime inherently protects her from damage tied to in-universe causality, and as a perfect vessel for the Phoenix Force, she benefits from resurrection across temporal boundaries. The Phoenix can restore her at any point in time because both it and Jean, while bonded, operate beyond linear time, so conventional lethal attacks are only a temporary setback at best. The only realistic counters are reality-erasing or existential nullification hacks that remove her from the ontology she occupies, a requirement that demands tools or powers capable of erasing a pan-dimensional, time-transcendent anchor rather than merely overcoming biological durability. In short, Jean's direct durability feats against outerversal foes may be limited, but her pan-dimensional nature plus Phoenix Resurrection make her effectively persistent across time and reality, leaving only true ontological erasure as a reliable means to neutralize her. In terms of speed, on a low end, Jean is easily into that irrelevant speed tier with clear omnipresent implications by virtue of being beyond the likes of eternity, much like Storm. As for her abilities, Jean doesn't merely operate inside the cosmos. She steps outside of it and rearranges the rules that make a cosmos possible. Her pan-dimensional physiology places her qualitatively above the established outerversal layers because she can exist and act within realms like the Beyond, and Carol Danvers, aka Captain Marvel's description of wielding the Phoenix as a state where there was no more time and space, a pinpoint and something vast, reads like someone viewing space-time from outside it, which means Jean as the Phoenix transcends the cosmos and its governing principles and therefore gains at least 1 extra outerversal layer of physiology, which would lead us to a conservative, again, 4 layers into that outer tier. Beneath that trans-infinite scope, she remains an Omega-level telepath with mind-bending telepathy, casting illusions, overriding wills, sensing and silencing emotion, communicating with every mutant on Earth simultaneously, resisting and countering memory manipulation, and shutting down people's abilities. But she's an equally monstrous telekinetic, able to not only fling mountains, but stitch rifts in space and even mend the white-hot room. So her role as Earth's second strongest mutant reads less like a ranking and more like an understatement of a being who touches the scaffolding of reality itself. For the rest of the X-Men listed prior, they'll largely be irrelevant here, as I said earlier. But now that we've established the higher tier scaling for the X-Men, let's dive into the matchup. This should be quick. I mean, as far as you can probably already tell, by virtue of infinitely transcending the Phantom Thieves by going an additional layer into Outer at minimum, the X-Men win here, mostly because of their two heavy hitters. Jean and Storm don't just contest the cosmos, they put their hands on the machine that builds it, and that difference makes the outcome inevitable. The Phantom Thieves move like ghosts in deep, dangerous architecture, breaching outer layers with precision and earning at least 3 layers into that outer tier pretty consistently. Yet their highest feats read like expert lockpicking on a door that still separates them from the core. Jean walks into the white-hot room and stitches seams into the thing that sits outside of the Omniverse, a surgical intervention into the scaffolding of reality itself, while Storm's overthrow of the adversary in the overworld reads like a coup against the very regulator that channels how universes come to be. To put it another way, the Thieves can fracture rules and rearrange outcomes inside the structure. Jean and Storm touch the architecture that defines those rules, granting them a conservative minimum of 4 layers into Outer and a dozen canonical ladders to climb for higher scaling. I mean, I didn't even mention the fact that there's a cosmological stopgap between the far shore and the beyond, which is an endless amalgam of infinitely transcendent higher dimensions which go on for eternity. Using this in the scaling would potentially get Jean and Storm to infinite layers into Outer, with each of these structures being completely, qualitatively, and quantitatively superior to the ones below, like a tunnel of infinite size, with each brick being a new layer of infinity, leading you to the infinite realms beyond the infinite realms, making the very concept of infinity dwindle into meaninglessness. So even without the airtight outer atoms or outer microverse scaling chains, this endless chain of qualitatively and quantitatively trans-infinite stepladders leads to infinite A-lifts worth of qualitative and quantitative superiority with seemingly no end, meaning the strongest mutants in Marvel run the pockets of the Phantom Thieves. To Jean and Storm, at their peak powers, even Joker and Yahweh are but particles floating in an infinite sea that may as well be a single atom on a single hair on their heads. And if you take the higher end scaling that I just presented, even somebody like Philemon or Nia don't even come close to comparing to them. In short, any matchup where victory depends on who reshapes the authorship of reality rather than who just hits the hardest, the Phantom Thieves' brilliance is tactical and stunning, but ultimately bounded, while Jean and Storm's interventions are structural, decisive, and escalatory. They don't just win the fight, they own the control room. Which is why, in a battle between the strongest mutants and the Phantom Thieves, the X-Men come out on top.